Today, we're going to pick up where part one left off. In part one of this episode, we discussed the birth of the Maria Theresa Thaler dated 1783. Today, we're going to start to finish the story and talk about why it wouldn't die. What were the players and what life did this live? All right, so our Maria Theresa Thaler lived a heck of a life. Now, at the beginning of its life, it perhaps was a trade coin that was isolated to European markets, Amsterdam, etc. But very quickly, this became the only acceptable trade coin throughout East Africa, the Saudi Arabia, or former places that were, Muscat and Aden, all of these huge ports, including even all the way over to India. And at one point in the 1850s, the government of Austria thought, hey, let's update the coin. I mean, look, the thing is ancient, right? And they tried to drop it onto the people, and they just no, we will not touch it if it doesn't say 1780. Okay. The last documented case of regular widespread use was the 1970s in East Africa, but there's still multiple reports of this being used even today in certain combat zones. So who created this thing that wouldn't die? Well, there was a lot of people. Gunsberg was the original mint upon which this coin was produced, but by the time of Maria Theresa's death in 1780, it had picked up a lot of traction. It was getting powerful, and some little mint out in the middle of nowhere isn't going to be able to keep up with demand, and so production was begun at Vienna as well. But it turns out that it was much more than that, because within the life of this coin, it was minted in the Habsburg lands in Günzburg, Vienna, Hall, Carlsberg, Kremnitz, Prague, Milan, Venice. I mean, so all kinds of places. But here's the deal. Because this is the only coin that those people in the Africa, Arabia, Western India were going to accept, all kinds of other European powers were like, hey, dude, I want in. Okay. And so the British started to produce Maria Theresa Taylors in London to meet the demand of trade in that region in their colonial holdings. The Italians tried to bypass it, and they tried to work in Eritrea, and they introduced a colonial currency in Eritrea that was supposed to replace this thing. It went nowhere. Then Mussolini invades Ethiopia in 1935. He had to. There was only the only way he could effectively work was to create Maria Theresa Taylors. So everybody, including the French, including the Belgians, everybody was making this thing. Now, at this point, the only ones making it is the Vienna Mint, but that's a pretty recent change. They asked the London Mint to stop producing them about 50 years, 40 years ago, about that. But perhaps the most interesting story about the Maria Theresa Taylor may or may not be true. All right, put your skeptic's hat on because it's a good story. So now the American OSS, Office of Strategic Services, they were fighting a war during World War II. The Japanese occupied many parts of the world, and one of the places was Indonesia. Okay, what was at the time Dutch East Indies, but Japanese had imposed an occupation currency on the people of Indonesia, and they hated it. And so the Americans came in and started flooding the market with fake Maria Theresa Taylors, fake. And according to Stanley Lovell, the OSS R&D director, he was interviewed in a 1962 Popular Science article, and he said, quote, the money for which the Indonesian would do anything. Okay. Now, let's take this with a grain of salt. First off, Indonesia was never part of the Maria Theresa trade system. The people of Indonesia would never know what this is. They have no reason to know what this is. So right up front, I'm a little skeptical that these people would just embrace something that they had no connection to. And secondly, in this interview, the director, Stanley Lovell, he said they were the size of a U.S. quarter. Maybe you remember in part one of this episode, I told you it's larger than an American silver dollar. It's not really. So it's a good story about the American OSS flooding the Japanese system, but take it with a grain of salt. So now let's talk about what this coin was to an unskilled laborer. If you were an unskilled laborer in 1780, the year at which this is dated, I'm not going to say minted, all right? Your daily wage was 0.96 gulden, right? Gulden was the currency of the Netherlands, and it would take you 2.5 days to earn one Maria Theresa Taylor, okay? 2.5 days. Meanwhile, what could it buy for you? 67 pounds of rye. That's a lot of rye. Why rye? Nice. Because rye bread was an absolute staple commodity in 1780 in Amsterdam. So if you had 67 pounds of rye, you could make enough bread for 48 days for one person, or perhaps more to the point, 12 days for a family of four. Okay? Kind of doable. Now let's flash to a different part of the world, Tanganyika. Tanganyika is kind of modern Tanzania. I can't remember else is in there, but Tanganyika, in that East Africa. And an East African worker in Tanganyika earned 11.31 pence per day. And so if they took all of their earnings, it would take them 8.8 days to earn one Maria Theresa Taylor. What could they buy with it? 105 pounds of maize. What is maize? Maize is essentially corn, similar. It's a cousin, corn's cousin. And it is used to make the staple food of this part of the world, ugali. Ugali is a porridge of sorts, a pudding. I kind of it reminds me of polenta, though I'm sure some viewer is going to kind of tell me that ain't polenta. I'm sure that's true. Okay, so 105 pounds of maize could create 13.4 weeks worth of food for one person, or 23.5 days for a family of four. Okay, so now flash forward to 1931, and we've got the Great Depression starting to rage. And guess what happens? Wages plummet. These poor workers in Tanganyika are now earning 6.19 pence per day, like half of what, well, yeah, half of what they had been earning. And it took them 16 days to earn one Maria Theresa Taylor. But if they had it in their hands, this good news was commodity prices had just crashed as well. And so all of a sudden, one tailor would buy 291 pounds, 37 weeks, or 64 days. So it's your money went down, but your purchasing power went up. Flash forward to the war, and what do you find? That it was 5.18. Your wages went down, and the price of maize skyrocketed due to demand from the war. What could you buy? 49 pounds. What's that good for? 19.2. What is it? It's behind my camera. 6 weeks. Whew, 6 weeks for a person, but only 19.2 days for the family. And you think of, no, 10.5 days. That's what happens when there's a camera in front of me. 10.5 days. So the math doesn't work out very good. It takes 19.2 days to earn the food that will feed your family for 10.5 days. Okay. Things were not working well. So what is the value, the life that it holds today? So now, my first Maria Theresa Taylor, I got it free. I was 1983, and my 12-year-old self had an annual subscription to Coinage magazine, and they send you a Maria Theresa Taylor. That's when silver was like $3 an ounce, okay, something like that. Went on eBay and started looking at to buy it now, and $48 was the lowest price you could pay for it. However, just a few weeks ago, I picked this one up from an auction for $36.26. Why? Look at the life this thing has lived. Whoa, look at the life this bad boy has lived. Every other person on eBay seems to be chasing the perfect, the clean, the wonderful, right? The life that lived. Okay? If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit like and subscribe.